Firstly, let me thank the Island City team for participating in the event this morning. We have Dorraine, Duncan, who is a city planner and policy analyst that explores issues at the intersection of environmental sustainability and equitable economic growth. Her research and analytical skills have been applied to renewable energy, coastal resiliency, food security, open space development and conservation in the US, Mexico, Singapore, and Jamaica. And we also have from the Island City Lab, who is the co-founder, Jhordan, who engages with urban issues across multiple scales by borrowing a set of tools from planners, policy analysts, urban designers, and architects. So of course, he has a very broad skill set. He has applied this toolkit to the design of public spaces, infrastructure, and architectural projects in Kingston, New York City, and Atlanta. He's very interested in the socioeconomic dynamics of communities and the role cooperative economic systems can play in building resilient communities. So let me hand it over to the Island City team.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Ronald, and thanks for inviting us to this really exciting conversation. So to kick it off, I think across the Caribbean and Latin America, historically, some of the most volatile times that we've faced as independent nations have really followed the global fallout of an oil crisis, right? So our transportation sector, which as we all know is really foundational to the productivity of our economies, is usually where we feel gas price hikes the most. So within that context of the current global cost of living crisis that we are feeling most acutely at the fuel pumps, Island City Lab really wanted to share a quick look at how car dependency burdens us as individuals and makes us less resilient as towns and cities, particularly those in small island states. So across the English-speaking Caribbean, our transportation system is distinctly car dependent, which means that we have high levels of per capita car travel, we have car-oriented land use patterns, and reduced transportation alternatives. As an example, in Trinidad and Tobago, it's said to have the highest number of vehicles per capita in Latin America and the Caribbean, right? Additionally, cities across the English-speaking Caribbean have sprawled away from the original urban cores and have become characterized by strict separation of uses and excessive parking that really pushes services far away from each other and really creates very hostile environments for people who have to walk, for pedestrians and for cyclists. And in Jamaica, where Jhordan and I live, in Kingston in particular, a supermajority of the residents do not actually own cars, nor use them as their primary mode of transportation. But despite this, the infrastructure that we invest in makes up our transit network is specifically designed to advantage private car use by really reducing the viability of other options, such as walking, transit, or even cycling. So the reality is that participating in what we call car culture is really out of the reach of the vast majority of our population. People are going into debt because of the real burden of car ownership. In Jamaica, only the highest earning 20% of Jamaicans can actually afford to operate a car at a sustainable standard. So outside of the purchase price, estimates put the running cost around 560,000 Jamaican dollars a year. And that's obviously above minimum wage, right? And this does not even include the costs associated with servicing an auto loan, which lots of people end up taking out. So to be clear, across the region, despite this financial burden, there is a gradual rise in car ownership over time. But this says a lot less about any sort of distinct car-loving culture in the Caribbean and more about our lack of dignified transportation choices. So the way that we design our streets and plan our cities has really emphasized that the only dignified transportation option is to buy and to drive a private car.
Right, so how does car dependency burden us? Well, first, car dependency increases the cost of living and pushes goods and services further away. The biggest challenge really with accommodating private cars is what to do with them when they're not in use. They spend about 95% of their time parked or in storage and require a lot of space. The average parking space requires about 330 square feet, which is about the size of a studio apartment, the minimum studio apartment allowed in our planning frameworks. Our urban policies have really created an oversupply of parking through parking minimums. So in a city where there should be a vibrant concentration of shops, stores, institutions, and other destinations, parking pushes them further apart and actually extends travel time and distance. Even more troubling is that parking reduces the amount of land available for more productive uses. And this contributes to high prices of land, housing, and rentals in our towns and cities. This forces many to live along the periphery or resort to informal living arrangements to remain in the city. Car dependency reduces the viability of more affordable transportation alternatives. So that means walking, cycling, and public transit are the most affordable transportation options for any Jamaican, but our infrastructure for these alternatives is severely underdeveloped. Pedestrian networks throughout Kingston are disjointed and untraversable in many cases. Our works agency performs no maintenance nor rehabilitation work for sidewalks unless there's a major capital project slated. Bike lanes are crucial infrastructure to protect cyclists, but none exist in our cities. And progressive decline in revenues and mismanagement at our mass transit agency have made it unreliable and unable to meet the demand of a growing population. This lack of investment has real consequences measured in lives. Pedestrians and cyclists represent the majority of traffic fatalities between 2017 and 2021. Car dependency creates congestion that wastes your time and money. And while it might seem intuitive that increasing the widths of roads for cars will reduce traffic congestion, it really has the opposite effect. It's a phenomenon known as induced demand. When motorists recognize that increased road capacity is more convenient, they'll make more trips and choose that corridor more often over others. Eventually, traffic will return and continue to get worse. This is already happening along recently expanded corridors in Kingston. Car dependency requires expensive infrastructure that we cannot maintain. The agency tasked to maintain roads in Jamaica, the National Works Agency, in a recent report said that it would require 203 billion Jamaican dollars annually to maintain just our main roads at their current design standards. That's the equivalent of 22% of our national budgeted expenditure for the year for our main roads, which represent only 20% of our total road network. The reality is that private cars are not a feasible solution for the mobility needs of our island cities because we cannot build and maintain enough infrastructure for a nation of drivers.
So where do we go from here? It is possible to become less car dependent as a city, and many cities have and are currently doing it. And the strategies to get us there really aim at creating more diverse communities and having a more balanced transportation system that centers people and not cars. So the first sort of solution to this predicament is to thicken our communities. So when people live in dense, diverse, mixed-use environments, I'm going to stress the mixed-use environments part, goods and services are much easier to get to without a car. This means having stores and daycares and salons embedded within our residential neighborhoods. It also means having housing options in the places where we work. So the urban policies that can facilitate this type of development in new and existing communities are really through mixed-use zoning and ending parking requirements. And the second big sort of solution to this is really improving and increasing our mobility options. So many people across Jamaica, across the Caribbean really, assume the financial burden of car ownership because few viable alternatives feel dignified, they feel safe, or even are efficient, right? So investments in people-based infrastructure like sidewalks, shade structures, plants, and even street furniture really make walking more comfortable and more enjoyable, not just for those who have to walk, but also for those who could choose to walk, right? So proportionate funding really needs to be allocated to non-car transportation alternatives that match the percentage of the population that actually use these means of mobility. And in conclusion, I think, as we all know, the Caribbean has some of the most expensive energy and oil gas rates across the world. This current global oil crisis has, again exposed the glaring vulnerability in our transportation system. And I think we must take this opportunity across the region to really assess our priorities and pivot our policies and investments away from car dependency. So with that, thank you guys for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it back over to you, Renelle.
Thank you